Top 5 things you probably didn't know about California. Our next stop on the whirlwind tour of the U.S. brings us here. When we hear the name of this state, the first thing that comes to mind is usually the movie industry or fantastic beaches or really expensive places to live. Indeed, it seems that California might be all about those things, but what about those areas beyond the major cities in the state? There's so much more to learn. So what is past the major cities in the area? What is it that makes California so inviting to some and so disrespected by others? What, beyond all else, does this state have to offer? In our continuing tour, we welcome you to the next stop, so sit back, relax, and here we come. Number 5, the Golden Pass. When California was first occupied, it was an extension of Mexico. That much you probably already knew. What you probably didn't know was that the first official settlers of the state, aside from the Native American tribes, actually arrived in the 18th century as Spanish missionaries. It was during that brief war with Mexico that the United States officially adopted California as a territory, and it was, as pointed out 2 videos ago, originally included in the proposed area that would have become the state of Deseret had their proposal been accepted. In 1848 at Sutter's Mill, a certain metal was discovered and the California Gold Rush started. By 1850, it was turned into a state. So this golden state not only brought in a lot of people seeking to make a fortune, which ironically was made more by the shopkeepers than those that dug into the ground, and, as it was, major U.S. landmarks were created around the same time. It seemed to spark into a life of its own as it grew in popularity with a mixture of agriculture and the production of other things. So there is much more to California than LA or San Francisco, much more beyond Beverly Hills and their obviously lavish lifestyle. So much more to it than having a former governor that used to be a Terminator. Number 4, everybody's fault. There is one thing that makes California truly unique of all the states. It is the only state that has a major tectonic plate collision, also known as a fault in it. Sure, there are earthquakes all over, and smaller faults can be found mostly around the area of the Rocky Mountains, and volcanoes are also fed, but nowhere else in the U.S. is there such an obvious and equally destructive fault. I only need to mention 2 times to show you what I mean. The first was April 18, 1906, when the citizens of San Francisco discovered what living next to a fault really felt like. Aside from the liquefaction causing massive damage, the other big concern was fire. With water mains breaking, they had a tough time trying to contain it, and many of the structures were demolished with the shaking and the fire combined. Residents were evacuated and they fought the fires until, 5 days later, the whole event, including the aftershocks, finally stopped. And then they decided to rebuild. The big thing, though, was that they figured out how to make certain that the foundations they built on could be stabilized. They learned how to take care of issues that might be brought to bear in situations like that ever happened again. And on October 17th, 1989, it did. This quake, officially titled the Loma Prieta earthquake, but more famously named the World Series earthquake due to it hitting before the first pitch of Game 3 of the World Series of that year, had devastating effects. The 2-level highway that ran through San Francisco broke in many places, crashing down on top of cars and people, and the Bay Bridge collapsed. That was the result of that quake, leaving many dead and many more trying desperately to call and check on loved ones or to let their loved ones know that they survived. Many were saved, though, and as usual with the Bay Area, they began to immediately rebuild. Some might question the sanity of this, but those who study this kind of phenomena had already learned a lot. The actual damage done was, in point, minimal, and it could run a lot deeper. They had technology to keep the buildings upright, and they tested it to see what could be improved on. And who knows when the next one will hit. Number 3, a timely production. When talking about the exports the Golden State has to offer, one must be paramount to make sure the selection is truly universal. Boxing this amount may seem easy, but it may not be a surprise when I tell you which export has made the biggest impact in our lives, the one that all of us, sooner or later, takes notice of. That is, of course, oranges. Not just oranges either. California produces lemons, limes, grapefruit, pretty much the whole run of citrus products. With a warm climate and plenty of moisture from the coast, it makes a citrus's holiday. A couple of extra facts about citrus. The tart taste is actually from vitamin C that so many are aware citrus has a lot of. That, and if you believe it, the biggest vitamin C produce isn't one of the family in citrus, but it's a little Chinese origin fruit called kiwi. And kiwi has many other vitamins as well, but we're talking about California, not fruit nutrients. Number 2, the real treat. In 1852, a man by the name of Andrew Halliday moved to San Francisco and 17 years later witnessed a horrible accident. It is from here that he devised a workable cable rail system and pitched it to the city managers. 9 years later, the system was completed and open for business, and it inspired other cities to do the same as the first cable-operated public transportation system came online. Sure, there are others, many other types that go across cities. Subways, buses, L trains, all operate with the same idea, mass public transportation, but there's nothing like the original. Maybe that's why a certain company that merchandises certain produce declared that all the product was, in fact, the San Francisco treat with a cable car as a backdrop. Ding ding. Now that that's done, what will be number 1? Which California resident did I choose to nominate as the greatest Californian ever? Which celebrated person did I place as one of the most influential persons in the history of that state? Number 1, John Sutter. You may recognize the name, but probably not realize why, or maybe you do. It was at the mill he was making, and the town surrounding it, where gold was discovered in a creek in 1848, and that in and of itself was what created the first California mass migration in the form of the California Gold Rush. Sutter was a bit of a vagabond, moving from place to place throughout his life. He married well, but liked to spend money a bit more than making it. When he decided to try out the New World, it was in the biggest part to avoid the authorities trying to nab him for unpaid credit. So he left, landing in New York City in 1834. As he did so, he kept on the move, going from town to town until he reached St. Louis. From there, he transferred to Santa Fe with Germans as he spoke Swiss German and learned Spanish and English as well. But he still hadn't reached the spot that would later bear his name and create the fever that would put California on the map. He actually spent a few years in the Oregon Territories and the old Kingdom of Hawaii before he made his way to the city that would later be called San Francisco. And it was here he made a deal with the then governor of the territories to build a city and a fortress along the Sacramento River. By then, he was billing himself as a Frenchman and threatened to plant a French flag on the fortress called New Helvetia at the time. But when Americans came to the fort, he caved because he knew that he'd lose. Since he had made friends with so many surrounding the fort, he asked to set it up as the capital of the territory, hence the California capital of Sacramento. But it was at the mill, built by James Marshall along the river, where the name of John Augustus Sutter would make his mark, and California would begin its rise into the spotlight of many industries, agriculture, tourism, and of course, movies. So that's it. I'm going to stop the tour of the U.S. for a couple of weeks, get a couple of different videos up. So please like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you next week with a different subject in mind. Incredible that I had no mention of the movie industry at all, unless you count some bad puns.